Welcome to this session where we're going to talk about moving on from fossil fuels. I'm sure you all understand that we have to do that, fossil fuels being a big driver of the climate crisis. Today we're going to explore how that affects the event space and the choices that are being made and need to be made. I see a hierarchy of energy provision in the event space. The worst thing you can do is have diesel generators. You can mitigate that to a degree with HVO, let's say. But the best thing you can do if you're using diesel generators is use batteries to augment them, go hybrid, make massive fuel savings and pollution savings. And that's the middle ground. But the very best thing you can do is have a grid connection. So on the panel here today, we've got Richard from the O2, a place with a grid connection, but that's not the end of the story, which is interesting. We've got Helen from Manchester City, the council, not the football club, and they have a bunch of venues that they want to get grid connected, and so they're in the middle, some diesel, some grid. And then we have Michelle from Greener Power Solutions that has actually the answer to these issues. Battery power to augment diesel and actually, surprisingly, to augment grid-powered sites as well. So I'll start with you, Richard, if I may, because it seems to me that, and it may be to most of us, that you'd think if you've got grid power, your problems are solved. You have to think about where your grid power comes from, but in terms of fossil fuel use, it should be easy.
You'd think so.
Yes.
At the O2 we have a very stable, we have two source HV supply that comes in. I think the challenge for us lies with tours and productions, especially those with outside broadcast elements to them, wanting the perceived kind of belt and braces approach of bringing containerised generation in to back up their outside broadcast function, and it's convincing them that actually with resilience within the built system to provide that kind of stability and guarantee that they're not going to lose supply during their event. We do have certain tours or productions or that will come in and they will connect into our LV supply to take some of that out of the equation, but it still sits that that perceived kind of stability is only achievable through diesel generation. I think in the future, as you say, convincing them that actually containerised battery systems or hybrid solutions are the way forward. And that's the challenge with us as a venue, to try and sell that to the tour and production.
Yeah, interesting, because we were talking backstage about this, and it seems to a degree to be a psychological thing, a fear of grid failure. And I think if we looked at the statistics around that, you're probably more likely to have a generator failure than a grid failure, actually.
Absolutely.
And just to stay with you for a second, I mentioned earlier that having grid power is not the complete answer. You are faced with a generator issue. There is scope to improve that with batteries, but also green tariffs, right? I mean, they're out in the world. There are a lot of people selling them now. I guess every energy company in our country has a green tariff. But again, there's a kind of merit order of approach here. At the bottom end, a lot of companies are badging up fossil power with a green certificate and calling it green. And then in the middle, you have companies that are supplying actual green energy with a certificate. And at the top of the tree, the way I see it, if you can use your energy bill to get something built, if you can cause some renewable energy capacity to be built to supply you, then that's the very best thing you can do with your energy bill. And I think from talking backstage again, this is something that you're starting to look into.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So currently the O2 is supplied on a 100% green energy tariff, which the kind of responsibility, I guess, lies with the consumer to read the fine print as to where that green energy is sourced from, and whether there is biomass forms a percentage of that, or whether it is from another source. I mean, we are quite proud to say that we 100% from solar, wind, and we don't actually have any biomass built into our current tariff. But again, you know, what you do from that on, having, you know, on-site renewable sources and stuff like that is still, you know, that's a challenge for us at the O2.
Yeah, understood. On-site, of course, is a challenge in a venue, in a built environment, because there's not a lot of space around to build renewable energy. But it is possible to build a wind or a solar farm somewhere else in the country and use the grid to deliver that power to a venue. There's something we call off-site supply, off-site merchant supply. We did one for the Co-op bank here. About 15 years ago, we supplied the Manchester HQ with some wind turbines that we built in Lincolnshire. So that's possible for venues as well. It's the very best thing you can do with your energy bill, cause something to be built. Helen, you're in the middle, I think, transitioning. We talked about 13 sites, I think, that you've got in a study, a mixture of locations and challenges. If you want to just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so of the 13 sites, we've got 10 which are urban and 3 which are parts within an urban setting. And a couple of them are fully on grid power. One of them is currently having a major refurb at the minute. So it makes it really easy for events coming into that site to use the grid power, and then that's all on a green supply through the council's procurement. Then the other sites is a bit of a mixed bag, really. We've got some mains power connections that have been in place for years. There might not be in quite the right location for how events have evolved over the years. So we commissioned a study to look at how events are using those spaces now, how they may use them in the future, to come back to us and give us the recommendations on what the improved grid power would be in those spaces, the estimate costings versus the potential carbon savings associated with that. So we've got the start of a business case for the investment into those spaces. The ultimate aim being that it doesn't cost the event organiser any more than it would do if they were to continue using diesel generators, so that ultimately we can move to a place where, as a city, we say no diesel generators in this space. You have to use the grid power, or potentially there may be a period of time where that's backed up with battery, or it may be that if the connection isn't quite enough, battery might be part of the solution as well. So we've done a bit of testing as we've gone along as well. So we've got one site where we put in a bigger mains power connection. So it again proves that it does work. It was used for both a large-scale festival with a main stage, and it was used for the ice rink this Christmas period just gone. So that really saved a lot of diesel for what an ice rink traditionally uses quite a lot. So yeah, we're just sort of proving it as we go along, show that it does work, because there does seem to be that fear factor, I'd say, of people being comfortable with generators, and it's about showing that grid power really does work.
Yeah, nice. And it does seem mad to me to have diesel generators running in the city. And you know, the grid runs just about everything in our lives. Why there should be concern that it can't run a festival, for example, I don't understand. And it's quite the best outcome when you can arrive at a place like you described, where it doesn't cost any more for the event space, but you just don't burn diesel. If you can achieve that, then you know, there are no barriers really, are there? Only the psychological ones.
Completely, and I think the air quality as well is. We've focused a lot because we have our zero carbon by 2038 commitment, so the carbon is really key. The reduction of carbon, but the air quality as well, particularly in some spaces where it's quite a narrow space, particularly when you put a load of event goers into that space as well. It's just not pleasant to be having a drink next to a generator.
Noise as well, isn't it? It's not just the smell, but the noise. Yeah, it's not fun. And Michelle, you've got the answer, right?
I have the answer
to all of these problems. You got the batteries that can work with the gen sets all back up the grid.
Yeah. At Greener Power Solutions, our founders in 2018 were walking around at a festival site backstage, and they realized that the festival was working really hard to be sustainable, like with food, and they were asking their artists to come over and don't use planes and come by train, and then they had like 2 500 kVAs gen sets behind the main stage running all the time, and they were like, why? And then they figured out that indeed gensets are like the only solution at that time if you need power. And then there's still not really any other ways of generating power on site if you have no grid. And that's when they realized then we have to make sure that if you use generators, use them efficiently and use them smart, and don't use more than you have to use. And that's where batteries came in. So they developed the batteries, and now we're mainly working with batteries and our software, and we can combine pretty much anything at this point.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it does.
UPSs have been in the world for a long time, haven't they? For backing up critical infrastructure, for example. And we were talking backstage about the role that these kind of steps have from a venue's point of view in taking fossil fuels out of the equation and that kind of stuff, in the role that they have in winning tenders to put on events. I mean, I think you've both got some experience of that, which I find really interesting. Like there's a push or a pull now from artists to check the venues that they're going to play at and to make sure that they're doing the right things. I don't know if one of you want to jump in. And
yeah, absolutely. I think we've noticed at the O2 more and more over the last few years that questions come pre-arrival. Can you provide us with data around what the initiatives are at the venue at the moment? What from single-use cutlery all the way through to how you procure your energy, what your energy kind of and environmental policies, and even more so post-event, we're filling out more and more questionnaires from the larger tours and the big artists that are quite openly very environmentally friendly, like the Billie Eilishes and the Robbie Williamses and all of those kind of big name artists that. It's no longer just a sort of financial decision being made by the venues around how can we cut costs and how can we operate more energy efficiently. It's about making sure that we're still an attractive prospect for these big name artists, because they don't want to be associated anymore with gas guzzling venues that kind of have polluted the planet, completely against what they're selling themselves on.
I love that. And Helen, are you facing any resistance in the council to this kind of move, putting the grid into your venues? Do you have to make the economic case, for example, or does the environment case begin to trump that?
I think we, as a local authority that's seen a number of cuts over a number of years, the financial case always needs to be made because we're spending public money. So we've got to really show cost-benefit analysis on things. But as a city which was one of the first to declare a climate emergency, and we've got our own climate change action plan, which has 2038 as our zero carbon target, I kind of don't really need to make that case so much of let's stop using fossil fuels, because clearly that's a massive carbon emitter. I think it just really does help the case when there is a financial benefit as well there. And I think, so in the case of the ice rink this Christmas time, it wasn't a financial benefit to the council because it's delivered by an external company. But it was interesting to see that actually moving over to grid power this year was a cost saving for them in terms of the cost of diesel, because of the price of diesel going so high. So I think where we can, it's always important to show that it's at least cost neutral, but actually preferably there's a cost benefit to it as well. And I think just on that point about it being a requirement of people holding events now, I think we're seeing it more and more on the whole range of events. So I think I mentioned earlier about quite small scale promotional type events, like a brand promoting a new product. We've been asked on that level for sustainability policies and grid power, and there's a lot more coming from the customer now than there ever was. And I think it's music events as well, as Richard was saying, and sports events. There's a lot more push from sports events now. And yeah, when we're bidding for events, it's a key part of the application process now. So I think it's commercially makes sense as well as environmentally.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I was thinking air quality as well. I didn't know if that was a lever, something that helped you in conversations at the council.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that as well. I think the sort of triple benefit of carbon reduction, air quality improving, and financial. Yeah. Definitely all of it.
Pretty good, right?
Use anything.
You can get all three. That's pretty good.
Yes.
What are we waiting for? And Michelle, are you finding that when you're tendering to supply a festival or something like that, is the economic case at the heart of a go-ahead decision? Because I think you were telling me backstage that diesel savings can be up to 60%, which is enormous. But I don't know how that compares to the cost of hiring in your batteries.
I think especially for events, we see that certainly a couple of years ago, it wasn't really. Nobody really knew how much diesel they were using, like for specifically which generator. So they knew overall how much the bill is, but they didn't really specifically know what diesel went where and how much did we use on a stage and how much did we use to put on the caterers. So that was the first thing that we kind of felt like you have to know what you're exactly using at which point in time, and then. We figured if you have a fairly big load and a very inefficient diesel generator, which is usually the case if you don't really think about it, then the business case is good for using batteries. Because then, you can save up to 60, 70, 80% of diesel. And if you have a grid connection, and you would usually put a diesel generator next to it just to be sure, or to have more power, then the battery obviously saves 100% of the diesel. So the business case is there. But, I mean, for the smaller events, it's always like you also need the green heart to, in the end, you have to want to do it because it's a change for production teams as well. So it's a different change. It's a change in a culture that's been there for a long time, and people trust the generator, and it's. And then they have to step over into a new technology, which is also computer-based and programmed, and we're actually monitoring like 24/7, but we're not there at the site. So if something happens, we have like half of our team are programmers. So they're at home, and they'll be working from their laptops, and they'll fix problems, and they see problems. But it's a total different way of working.
It's a cultural thing.
It's totally cultural.
Like getting people out of fossil cars into electric cars.
Yeah, just remember a couple of years ago what people would say, like, it's not a car. And now?
Yeah. And outside broadcast, you mentioned that. Richard, maybe I'll come back to you about that, because I'm so surprised that, for a live football game, for example, that's the experience I have with Sky TV. They'll bring generators to a football stadium in London that has grid. I'm so surprised by that, and I think you have experienced the same kind of thing. Yeah,
no, we do. Like I say, all the sort of televised events tend to, like I say, belt and braces. I wonder if the kind of, with it being new, the battery technology being new, it's very easy to leaf through a big generator catalogue and you just sort of pick out, are they the big one? Because you know that it's going to, satisfy all the criteria for their, and looking at, new containerized battery systems, effectively, like you mentioned, these huge racks of batteries, how much do I need to make sure that, I have that safeguarding for the event throughout that, and possibly that's, a bit of a blocker for people making that jump into the new technology. You can look at a car, right, and you look down the list and it tells you it's going to do 360 miles, but everyone knows that actually in real world it's 220. So what does that mean for event and the kind of making sure that it's got that kind of guarantee? That's possibly why people are kind of reticent to make that step. We find that potentially, if you've got a tour or a production that is set up, they've kind of designed the tour to go on the road, then they don't know that the provision is going to be at every single venue along the way. So it's almost like you need the unity within the venues to all go right. This is almost like a standardized connection that all venues can give you an HV connection or an LV connection onto the grid at a certain capacity, and it needs to be almost advertised at the start, so that people can pick their entire touring route round and make sure that they're going to have that provision. Otherwise, even if one or two venues along the route don't have the connection, then they have to take generation for at least that part of it. And the likelihood is then they'll probably just make the decision to take it for the whole thing, because it's easier than changing the way they run the event.
That's interesting. Something you said there, made me think there is a link between cars and generators, because the thing that we're used to is we can just keep filling them up, right? So the range of an electric car is important, but when it's empty, it takes, we know, quite a long time to fill it up. With a fossil car and a fossil generator, you can just keep filling them up and getting that power, like whenever you need it, forever, arguably. Not really forever, we know that. But I think that's part of the cultural challenge. And so we have not just an economic challenge, but a cultural one as well, to get people off of diesel generators, either by grid connecting sites, or even when you've got a grid connected site, get them off it and get batteries into play. Any further thoughts?
I think just on that behaviour change point, I think what we found through doing this scoping study, so we engaged with about 30 different event organisers and asked them what their power usage was, both in terms of what size generators they were bringing in and what equipment they were actually powering with that. There's sometimes even such a disconnect between those two things. So they're already used to going big on the generator because of that fear of it not being enough, because nobody wants to run out of power. And I think we were talking about this before as well, that in a whole event team, there's not that many people that truly understand the power, because that's what you pay your power expert for. So people just don't understand it enough to want to take a risk on it. So I think as much as we can show that it does work, and that's why having really good case studies out there and seeing, like, if there is an outside broadcast that does make that switch, sharing that amongst people so that people can see when it really does work. It's like it's quite new for an ice rink, I think, to switch away and move on to mains power. So I think we've got a role to play there as well in terms of pushing that message out, show that it does work. I think the fact that people are already used to not taking that risk on the actual generator, to then ask them to move to a whole other technology, it's quite a big leap, isn't it? So I think the behaviour change is really a key thing to win over.
And there is a lack of data at the heart of the problem as well.
Exactly.
I mean, I've spoken to a few festivals, and they can tell you how many litres of fuel they use, but they don't know how much power they use.
Yeah.
And that's fundamentally an issue there.
And the peak times as well, because I think that's the thing as well, that you might be using power like this for most of it, and there might just be one big bit, which is maybe where a battery comes in. And
what you usually see is that they kind of know the peak. That's the only thing they know, and then they put a double in, just to be sure.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so you end up running everything at this level when you could have mainly done it down here. But I think it's not just power though, is it? Like you said, people don't know how much fuel. I think there's been a culture of doing it without really looking at the detail of it. And I think we're in a period of time of trying to gather so much more data to really understand the impact, to then be able to plan going forwards, because I think it's a time thing as well, and the last few years hasn't helped in terms of capacity of event organisers.
Maybe if I may, because I mean, we're talking about grid like it's always available, or it should be always available, but I think there's a lot of places and sites where grid is not available, and it's not going to be available anytime soon. So I think another thing that we have to look into altogether is how are we going to get renewables on site, like mobile solar, mobile wind, mobile anything. And we see that there's not much there in the market. There's like small businesses opening up and small technologies, but the whole development of it is not going as fast as, for example, we would like to. So that's another part of, grid would be fantastic, but it's not going to work everywhere, and it's not going to be the solution for all the problems. So what are we going to do in the meantime with the other places?
I have an answer.
Yeah, I hoped you have.
So it's something we've been looking at for festivals where grid maybe isn't possible, or it's too expensive, because I think usually you can get the grid. It's a question of how much it costs to get it there, and that's the real barrier. So we've been looking at the idea of building solar farms next to a festival site in order to justify bringing in a grid connection, because a solar project will pay for that, and then throw a cable over the fence, not quite literally, to the event, and bring the event onto the grid. And Because the problem with portable solar installations for festivals is the power capacity of panels is relatively small. You need
space.
You need a field. Yeah. So we're working with a few festivals at the moment to find land nearby to bring the grid in and then therefore get them on the grid, which is, I think, one answer to that problem. And I wanted to just come back, Richard, to the idea of this remote power station thing as well. Because I think you said you use 4 gigawatt hours a year?
Yeah, around that, yeah.
And it's not a very big project, actually, in terms of generating capacity. We could, I think my mic's gone off. We could... I just speak loud here. I've got a very loud voice, but I'll give it a go. We could easily build, for example, I mean, not just us, other people can do it as well, I'm sure. So wait for the mic.
The mic's off.
We have a backup.
Always a good idea.
I can hear me now. Yeah, I was saying that 4 gigawatt hours is not a huge amount of power. It's not a very big renewable energy project, and it would be easy to build one, dedicate it to the O2, for example, and give you the greenest power outcome that you could have. These answers are out there actually for events that don't have the grid, and for venues that do have the grid. So I'm now holding a mic. Any further thoughts you guys want to chip in?
I mean, so that's very loud. For us, the O2, real estate is our biggest kind of blocker in terms of renewable energy on site. Even I was saying to you earlier that building integrated photovoltaic cells still don't lend themselves well to being plopped on top of a big tent. The roof, we don't have a giant roof that we can put PV on. We have some car parks. However, getting that linked up and feeding back in is a challenge in itself, and also just with the development in the local area, it's constantly chopping and changing what our sort of real estate looks like. So looking at PPAs or off-site generation and agreements with how we can sort of diversify our supply is a real kind of focus for us at the moment. We've kind of had some sort of flirtation with small-scale wind generation on site, but as you say, it's new technology. People are bringing these sort of prototypes to market. You'd imagine that being sort of jutted out into the middle of the Thames on a peninsula, you'd have a wind whipping around there the whole time, but the shape of the O2 actually creates a lot of turbulence for the wind that flows over it, so wind turbines don't tend to work that well in certain positions, and also you have obviously the added challenge of planning permission for anything larger around there. People don't like to see giant windmills in the centre of London or the east of London. So now we're looking into agreements with sort of purchasing in our supply from dedicated renewable sources, something that potentially we could invest in or a shared asset that would be a dedicated supply for the O2 in order to guarantee exactly we know exactly where our energy is coming from, and it's a longer term investment.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Small windmills in built environments aren't effective at all. I remember many years ago, Sainsbury's put a couple of small windmills in by a flagship store in London, and I chatted to the energy manager about that. I mean, I'm a wind person, so I knew that it wasn't making very much. And he was honest. He said, look, it's powering the S in the Sainsbury's sign.
And you think the turbines that we had installed were in situ throughout the whole of Eunice. So you'd imagine they'd have been absolutely tearing around through that storm, as did a lot of things that day. But the power output is minimal. It's almost if you put small scale stuff like that in, that's not real kind of tangible. It's almost it's not worth doing, and it looks great, and there's kind of PR around having that kind of thing on site. But when it comes to having a meaningful impact on your consumption, you need to look at off-site generation for us.
Yeah, it's almost greenwashing, isn't it?
I wasn't going to say that.
Say that? I'll say it, I don't mind. And Helen, you were saying earlier that it would help to have examples that people can look at. I think like case studies, for example. I think that's a really important point, actually, to be able to show the event world that it's been done in lots of different kind of combinations, whether it's hybrid diesel on a remote site or gridding up a city centre site or doing an outside broadcast, at a venue without diesel.
Well, we actually did the Commonwealth Games last year, and we worked together with Agreco, and we had a solar field next to it. It worked, but I mean, we needed a whole field.
Yeah.
So, like in usual festivals, don't really have the space for a field extra. Like they prefer to have more bars or more stages or whatever, which actually brings in money and not just costs money. But yeah, we're very much into creating studies and showing people like, okay, we can do it. Come around, come visit, come. Like everybody's always invited to come and see how it works, and to come test and to come play. So that's.
What were the savings at the Commonwealth Games?
I don't know by heart. No, a lot. I can check it for you later.
Okay. See, that would make a great case study.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Any other thoughts?
You're talking about battery storage. For us, I know that the events, are sort of structured very differently in their sort of requirements for temporary power, effectively. For us, events power, if you want to call it that, only forms a very small part of our consumption at the arena. We have a massive shopping centre. We've got all the entertainment district and the restaurants. So our base load is quite high. And event power is only sort of 3 or 4% on top of that. So the tours that come in and the productions actually only consume a very small part. So, looking at off-site renewables, one thing, but B, looking at on-site battery storage and connection to sort of a smart grid. So we look at peak lopping. When we've got these events in, we can trim the top off our base load by supplementing it with battery storage on site, and it sounds like green solutions can have got that kind of technology and development, and that because although the batteries are huge in terms of them being batteries, they're not double A's, they're containers, but that's something that being in London and having a fairly limited footprint, so you can store these things, and you can stack them high and kind of supplement your on-site storage in that way.
That's a good point, actually. The smart grid is crossing over into this world. As an energy company, we're installing 40-foot containers and batteries at sites where we've built already a wind park, and adding a solar park and getting a kind of three-way hybrid generator with storage, able to respond to the peaks and troughs on the grid.
You're balancing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what we do as well in the Netherlands.
Yeah, of course, which makes perfect sense. The idea, though, that it's an additional kind of business case for a venue, actually.
Yeah. So historically, some of the sort of businesses I've looked after, if you had on-site diesel generation, you'd participate in triad avoidance, and you try and make your kind of financial savings, or the incentives were there to run diesel generation that you had. Typically they're standby generators, right? But you're running them at 6-7 o'clock at night to try and hit these triads and make a payment back that way. But whether you can use battery storage on site to basically achieve that same thing, or cut your usage during peak times and effectively sort of balance off the grid and make the savings that way. And I think there's a good case for investment in built venues for that kind of technology to try and alleviate the stress on the grid, because it's only going to get worse. At the moment, I need to look at this winter when we had the kind of warnings come out, around supply stability through London, and there was several calls out to people, to sort of ask for usage to be cut during peak times and stuff, and for us that doesn't really work. You can't just turn the air conditioning off mid-event because you're trying to get that financial kind of reward. It doesn't work. So we'd have to look at being able to backfeed into the grid from battery storage on site.
Yeah, definitely. And Michelle, you said that's what your tech does, which I understand. But I wondered, are you looking at grid balancing as something that you could do with your technology when it's not out on a venue, when it's in your car park?
We're actually looking into it right now, like how could we, for example, use the battery as a service, so just peak shaving as a service. So you wouldn't rent out the battery, but we only the peak shaving part, and then we could use the rest of the capacity of the batteries on the times that you're not peak shaving for balancing or for anything. So yeah, that's like a new thing we're discovering right now and measuring if it's going to be something that we're willing to do. But yeah, for sure.
I imagine when your batteries are not out on site, they're in a yard somewhere.
Well, they're actually in trading hubs, as we call them. So next to a solar field or next to wind turbines, and then they're balancing that. So
you drop
and they're trading at the same time.
They are, yeah. So they're next to a good connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah, and we don't really have we don't need to store them, so it's actually pretty efficient for us to use them that way. Yeah.
And you get to fill them up with green energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before you take them out.
Yeah. 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 The only thing is the transport.
Yeah.
I mean, when's the transport world's going to have like big electric trucks? Yeah, that's the thing we're waiting for.
Yeah, they're coming.
They're coming. Yeah, we know. Yeah. So I'll just hold on for a little while, but it's usually sometimes people think just bring over like 20 batteries and we'll swap them. If one's empty, but then we have to explain to people like, yeah, but if you do that, you also have to measure the diesel you use in order to drive the trucks, because it might make more sense to put a small genset next to it and just let it run and charge it that way. It would probably save you a lot of money and diesel and anything like.
That's a good point.
It's always, I mean, it's always a good talk I like the idea that people say, oh, just bring in 20, and for our company that would be perfect, right? I mean, I should say yes to that, but that's not the goal. I mean, it's not the aim of the whole operation. It's to reduce diesel. So
big picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. So we're kind of approaching the Q&A bit. So it's your turn now, guys. Oh, there's a hand here already. We've got a roving mic somewhere, or a couple of them. Oh, there's a hand here. Do you want to put your hand back up, please? And somebody will come and find you, hopefully. Who's got the mic?
Hi. Just a small question. We haven't mentioned hydrogen. I know they're experimenting now with hydrogen generators. Is that something that's on your radar at all? Is that something that's coming?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is on radar, yeah, for sure. But like in the future, well, we would say grid's always better, and investing in solar and wind is always better than any other form. So until we're there, yeah, everything's an option, and we are trying everything, and we're testing everything, but it's not a preferred solution for us.
No, from my perspective. Because of the round trip efficiency, you have to use electricity to make hydrogen, and then you use hydrogen to make electricity, and in the process you're throwing away 50% of the energy that you had in the beginning. And so it's always going to be an expensive option in that use case. I think hydrogen's got other uses, but not so much for that, except maybe in a niche where you just can't use anything else, but I can't imagine what one of those would be.
And there's the storage problem, right?
Storage
You're not allowed to have a lot of it on site, so you'll have to swap and change. So it's the same, you get a lot of transport movements.
And it's a big volume relative to the amount of energy contained in hydrogen compared to fossil fuels, for example. Yeah, we've got a couple over here.
There's one as well.
Oh. Sorry, I'm blinded. Do you want to stick your hand back up? Yeah, three over here. We've got plenty of takers.
Hi, I come from sports, major sports So I'm really interested in the case study of Birmingham, for example, with using the batteries with a Greco, because I think that is perfect data. It's just more, because obviously broadcast, they pay a fortune for the rights, and so they have that strength in conversation, and they just bring in, obviously, as you know, their model and overlay it onto any stadium in terms of wanting that reliability and of the power supply, and then obviously their cable pathways are all they just roll in their existing system. So just because, as we said, the grid might be reliable in one country but not in another country, so they know they're doing it their way. If the batteries worked, have you got partners globally? Like, is this something that can be rolled out to the venues that are hosting World Cups, more Commonwealth Games, and Olympics, but generally, or was it? Because it seems obviously this conversation is UK specific, but what is the scale of being able to build on that case study of working with the Greco?
Interesting question. The World Cup definitely needs greening up. That's a question for you, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, we are really open. We tried to tender for the Olympics in France, and we didn't win it because we didn't have the data yet, but we tried. So, yeah, we're very much building cases and showing people what we can do in order to scale up. And we're from the Netherlands, so we just opened up a UK limited. And, well, we're working pretty much over all of Europe for now. So, yeah, we are able to work in other places and to copy-paste what we did there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Let's catch up afterwards, because
Yeah,
the test events are a good opportunity. Thanks.
Okay. Is there a second mic?
There's someone
at the back.
Yeah, I'm totally in the back.
I just wanted to add a comment. I'm glad you raised the issue of transport, because it is, I think, often forgotten over the overall impact on events. I run one in a rural area. We have got a grid connection, and we use a 100% renewable energy supplier. However, we do need extra because the connection just isn't big enough to take everything we need. And when you start looking at bringing in solar lighting towers versus diesel lighting towers, you can only get, I can't remember the exact figures now, I think you get less solar ones on a truck than you get the diesel ones, because they obviously have more space. So actually, when you start looking at the whole picture, over diesel usage, it's actually better to get the diesel ones because you actually have less transport. I think it's one of those wider, the bigger picture stuff, which sometimes we forget on when we're looking at the rural areas where connections aren't great, particularly with transport. I think you're right in terms of electric transport. That's obviously not there yet, but it's that bigger picture stuff. Sorry, it's a comment rather than a question.
Okay, thanks for the comment. And there was another question down here, I think. Oh, there's a forest of hands now. Sorry, I can do it in a minute.
Yeah,
Please.
do we need to get the DSOs more on board?
The DNOs?
Well, the DSOs a lot now, aren't they? Because you're generating and supplying. I know UK power networks are certainly, prosumers are certainly more part of the industry now than just producing and consuming, sort of merging. I know certainly we've tried to put in grid connections, and we struggle trying to get anything out of the DNO as to availability of DSO, of what power is available off that HV supply.
Mm. Yeah, they can be really difficult. I've experienced that in renewable energy, trying to get a grid quote from a DNO. Helen, you got any experience to share there?
I'd say we're quite early in our process, but up to now, initial conversations are not throwing up any challenges we don't think we can overcome. But yeah, it's definitely, I suppose in the project we're doing, we engaged with them early on to say what it was we were looking to do and see if there were any red flags. And then we'll go back to them now we've done the next stage. But so yeah, in terms of getting them involved in the conversation, yes, I'd agree.
Cool. This chap here's been waiting for a little while.
Thank you. I just wondered, very interesting hearing what you've been talking about this morning, and it seems that we're on a journey to move away from traditional fossil fuels into hybrid solutions. But nobody's talking about cooking oil and used cooking oil as an energy source, which I think sits very neatly between the two posts. And we, as a company, generate electricity, mobile power using used cooking oil in gensets, which is only about 7% less efficient than diesel fuel itself. Are the panel aware of it as an alternative fuel source? And if so, is that something that meets the greener requirements in the near term before switching over to, the battery model?
Well, I got thoughts on that, but does one of you want to jump in?
I mean, we're aware, certain sort of promoters or tours, ask about biofuels and what we're using in terms of our kind of generation or temporary generation. Again, I think it's sort of cultural, and diesel generators are a known entity, and reliability issues are not. Although, like we joke about, diesel generators aren't infallible, but I think it's almost promoting that this is an offering. It's out there, it's in the market, it's reliable, it can do this, and being able to sell that into the market. I think the questions are being asked. They're on the questionnaires that come back around sustainability initiatives and biofuels. They're on there, so people are asking the questions. I just don't think people haven't been prepared to sort of make that switch, or what you're providing hasn't historically been around long enough for people to take it up. Excuse me.
Yeah, I think I mentioned HVO at the beginning.
This is pure used cooking oil.
Yeah, okay. I think of them as like alternative diesels.
Yes.
And I think having a diesel generator is the worst thing you can do, and you can make that a little bit better with HVO or cooking oil. But I think they're both quite short-term and quite limited in their scope. I mean, there isn't enough waste oil in the country to do a big job. So I think it's necessarily quite limited and a step to something else. I think batteries and diesel are a better idea, reduce fuel consumption, and you're still going to get particulate emissions with alternative diesels. So for me, it's a kind of niche short-term thing that we have available to us now while we make this transition completely.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's there, and we should definitely use it as long as we don't have anything else, but it shouldn't stop us from looking further. So yeah, it's there. And
cool, thank you.
I'd agree on that also. Like, our Christmas markets went completely onto biofuel for 2022 as part of the solution. So it's a stepping stone, is what we see in our journey to move in as much as we can over to grid power.
I read something really interesting online on the way down here this morning. A study just released today by a university that said basically the idea of sustainable aviation fuel just won't work. That if all of Britain's planes were running on sustainable aviation fuel, which is a biofuel, we'd have to give up half of our farmland just to grow those crops. So I mean, that's I think an example of where biofuels and waste streams and all these other alternative diesels and fossil fuels, I think, are only for the short term.
Hello.
Oh, thank you.
One. Oh yeah, it's gone. I work for a 5,000 capacity rural festival, and we've looked at different options for fuel, but it all comes down to cost as well as what options are out there. So what is the difference with battery to normal sort of diesel generators in terms of cost?
Well, depending on how much you need and depending on what gensets you're using, and a battery pack is the business case. You can make the business case. That's our experience. If you have like a 200 kVA genset running usually, and if the load's a bit fluent, like if it's not a constant high load, which it's usually not, so it's pretty inefficient, then you usually are it's cheaper to put in a battery and put in a very small, like 100 kVA next to it, which runs very efficient, and then the business case should work. Yeah, so we can look into it later if you want. Yeah.
Very good. Who's got them?
I'm in creative event management from Falmouth Flex. My question is directed to Michelle. Now, looking at this venue, how many containers do we need for batteries to supply?
This?
Yes.
Phew. Well, depending on how, I don't even, do you have any idea how much this is?
This is using?
The load, yeah?
I have no idea.
No, it depends on the load.
And I've seen also, because I'm coming from Saudi Arabia, so they're using solar panels to do the light the streets, but with the huge musical festivals, which is now trending in Saudi, I see generators being operated. Please, could you give us a case that you have mentioned, or any case that mentioned that worked with the battery supply?
Yeah, well, if you mention that you see solar, I mean, if you use solar panels, any system, you will need a battery next to it. I mean, the solar itself is not, the panels itself are not doing anything, so you need to convert it, and it needs to be stored, and then it needs to be directed to the stage. So probably if they use solar, there's already some sort of battery system in place.
Oh, okay. All right.
I hope.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries.
Hi, I'm Jenny, I work for Live Nation. We are putting some of our festivals on the grid, hopefully, as we speak. And firstly, I just wanted to answer a question that someone asked earlier, which was about the DNO and the fact that they don't tell you the supply and how much you need. We've found that on most of our sites. Some of them are slightly more communicative than others, but what we found is that if you put your application in, which is a little bit of a challenge, but it's doable, it's not too hard, eventually you do get past the customer services who don't give you any information, and you end up with an engineer who will. So it's worth sticking at it and putting your application in and waiting to be given someone who actually knows what they're talking about. So trust the process, you will get there. Also, I had a question for you, Michelle. In terms of the batteries, this is something we're also looking into, because we're also looking at developing some solar and also things like hybrid, like you mentioned. The life cycle of a battery is what's sort of putting us off at the moment, and I'm sure you get this a lot, but it's something that we're concerned about, so we wondered if you could comment on it a little bit.
Yeah, well, what we see is that there's like in the supply chain, there's still a lot of stuff that we don't really know, and it's because most of it is produced somewhere in China, most of it. The life cycle of our batteries is, we think, around 12 years or so, and we're now working, for example, with a European company. It's called Northvolt, it's Swedish, and they're producing like Europe-produced battery systems, so they produce everything, and they're growing fast. Like it's and they're also really looking into the reusing of the batteries that we're now buying. So that's like their main thing, and we kind of trust the process in that in 12 years we'll have a solution. So it's something that we know that we have to deal with, but we don't have to deal with it now, because now the system's still working. So like in 8 to 10 to 12 years, we're pretty convenient that we found a solution for this, because everybody knows this and everybody realizes, and there's battery technology everywhere. So it's gonna be a big problem, so people know, and being in a big problem also means there's a lot of money available to actually solve it. So we're convenient, it will be solved. But we don't have the answer yet, so we have to be very honest.
It's worth saying also that battery technology is moving fast.
Yeah.
And it has moved fast in just the last 10 years since the first electric cars appeared. And second life electric car batteries are a really interesting source of batteries for this purpose, for peak shaving and for event running, because you don't need the same performance as you do from a car. You need your 100% from your battery in a car, but you can live with 80% in these other use cases. And there are going to be an enormous amount of second life electric car batteries coming into the market. I think the Stade de France already runs on some from Nissan, actually, and that's a great source, potentially, for you guys and for everybody that wants to use batteries and be a little bit ecological at the same time, reusing them.
Yeah, fair point.
Have we got any more questions? We've got 5 minutes. Use it or lose it. Yep, got one here.
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny from Weston Park over in Shropshire. So we are a outdoor venue that hosts around 24 events each year, primarily a greenfield site for 1,000 acres, so gensets are prevalent, as you can imagine. I was just interested to know, those of you that are operating venues, so Richard and Helen, in terms of your encouragement to event organisers to look at their green credentials and operate events as sustainably as possible, but without being prohibitive. How do you manage that? Is that something that's included in your policies, your terms and conditions, or is it just a conversation that you have during the booking process, really?
No, so we're actually developing at the moment. Its name isn't fully decided, but it's a sustainable rider package, effectively, which is a sort of document that we produce, which it kind of outlines our recommendations and sort of best practice for operating a tour sustainably, and that ranges all the way through from, you know, sort of Euro 6 compliance for all the tour vehicles. You know, we don't allow them to idle when they're on site. We insist that they kind of, you know, like I say, use EV where they can in terms of the production, forklifts and bits and pieces. We kind of, it's a really quite a long document, but at the moment it's not mandatory. It's their recommendations, and ideally we'd like to be in a point where we can kind of prohibit certain activities that tours do, you know, to ensure that they're as green and sustainable as possible. But until every single venue does that, you know, you almost risk alienating yourself from the sector by prohibiting that sort of stuff. So it kind of, you know, it's reliant on, you know, organisations like the NNA and that stuff all sort of coming together and agreeing actually that, you know, they're going to ban single-use plastics on tours. But until everyone does that, it kind of becomes a bit of a barrier. So at the moment, they're just recommendations rather than mandations on our part.
Can I come in on that one as well? Did you want to know from a city point of view as well? We have a three-pronged approach, really. We've got our own events, which we should have full control over and can implement greener solutions. Then we've got our funded events, who we ask to use our sustainable event guides that we produced in 2019, unfortunately just before COVID, so their progress was stunted a little. But we asked the funded events to use those. The funded events tend to be ones that are in need of more support, community festivals. So rather than just go, there you go, use that, we've gone through a process of engagement and training with them as well, and supporting them to understand. So, and we're still in that period. So the last event season, we worked with them to put a number through the Greener Festival assessment. And then our next stage is to work with them to understand what to do with those recommendations, what they might need support from the city with. And then the third stream, which is the biggest stream and the most impact, is any events that take place on council land. But they're the ones where we have less influence over them. So at the moment, it's been more of a conversation and saying there is this guidance available, or there's this other raft of guidance available, and then there's other recent initiatives from the event industry that we're pointing people towards. So it's been a conversation up to now, because we're also aware of the challenges that organisers are still facing as the impact of COVID, and just general price increases on everything. So it's probably going to need to move to more, these are the things that you need to follow, but we wanted to really work with them and gather that data and focus on a couple of key areas. So we focused on power and single-use plastics as sort of entry points into everything else, really. So that's where we're at the moment, but it's in a review process, I'd say.
Cool. Well, look, that's us done, actually. I can see the clock ticking down. We've got 30 seconds left. Time just for a quick wrap-up. we have to give up fossil fuels, and in the event space, we have to stop using diesel generators. The answers are in the world already, battery storage. Getting remote venues that are not on the grid onto the grid, I think, is a big part of that. And even for the sites that are on the grid now, you know, we've got to stop using diesel. But again, it can be done. What I'm hearing is it's more of a cultural problem than an economic one, actually. There's obviously an environment prerogative, a real need to do that. And I'm just very hopeful that you know, the event industry itself seems very alive to the issue and moving in that direction. So, I mean, from my point of view, that's great news. I want to just thank the panel. Maybe you'd like to thank the panel as well, and I'd like to thank you as well for listening. Thank you.